I'd like to say a big thank you to Sam Whitted for organising all of this and for inviting me to host this particular session. I'm a Director of Partnerships and Cities at Design Manchester. We operate an annual Festival of Design in Manchester, which we've done since 2013. And we work with creative and digital businesses across the entire sector. For my day job, I'm CEO of Images & Co. That's a design and innovation consultancy. We're focused on culture and identity in cities, organizations, and public environments. I'm really delighted that we have such a great panel today to discuss things. First of all, we have Irene Graham. She's the CEO of the Scale Up Institute. She is a former senior banker at Standard Chartered, where she ran and scaled up several client and product businesses. She's also a former managing director at the British Bankers Association and now a visiting professor of entrepreneurship at Strathclyde University. Matt Latham worked in the financial services sector long enough to know that it's full of jargon, hard for most people to really engage with, until he and his business partner, Tom McGillicuddy, who'd had a similar experience, came across the idea of impact investing to generate positive outcomes. That's why they set up Ticker, which combines socially responsible investing with easy for ordinary mortals investing. This seems to have come at a good time because more people than ever are concerned about the impact on society and the planet of the choices that they make. And more young entrepreneurs than ever also want to start companies that have a positive impact. Tom Wren graduated from the University of Manchester as a quantity surveyor and worked at Brockwood for 4 years before landing at the Manchester Science Partnerships in 2012. He's been managing with SciTech, which is a JV with Legal & General, that creates environments and ecosystems, science and tech companies to form, collaborate and scale, and also of Manchester Science Partnerships, which is now the largest science park operator in the UK. Sarah, who quite a few of you may already have been seeing this morning, is the head of business support for the digital, creative and tech sector at the Business Growth Hub. She has run creative businesses herself and has a decade of experience in growing teams and businesses. Sarah brings an international perspective to the task. She knows the creative sector intimately, and as many of us know, she is an inspirational person, playing a key role in supporting the sector in Greater Manchester. Sarah leads several programs at the Hub, including Greater Connected and Exceed, as well as the Creative Scale Up program. So welcome all. I would like to start by asking a question of Irene, if I may. It seems to me that when we're talking about scale-ups, we're really not talking about 5-person design studios trying to grow to 7. You know, you as the Scale Up Institute have produced some really interesting information about scale-ups generating a turnover of £1.1 trillion with an average turnover per scale-up of 32.6 million, with 96 people on average in the scale-ups, and the turnover of per employee being £338,000. So what I'd like you to help us with first is to get the technology right. When does a startup become a scaling business, and when does the scaling business earn the title of being a scale-up?
Yeah, very happy to do that, Casper, and thanks very much, and good morning, everybody. We look at what a scale-up definition. We're looking at making sure we can benchmark the UK to other international countries, and so we use the OECD definition of a scale-up. So when does a startup become a scale-up, or a scaling business become a scale-up? It's when you're growing at 20% or more in turnover or employment, or sometimes both, but it's either turnover or employment. You've been doing that for 3 years, and generally time you've already got 10 employees in the business. Then that may be for the creative sector freelancers that are working, but you've got that type of trajectory. And when we look at businesses on the scaling journey, well, we particularly look at those that are sort of growing at 15% or more and heading towards that 20% of growth. I mean, the important factor is what you said there, Casper, is that we have got 33,000 scale-ups in the UK economy. As you say, they are SMEs. They're part of that 5.9 million SMEs we have across the country, but they are the 33,000 generating 50% of the SME economy at 1.1 trillion. And in the Northwest, you've got almost 6,000 businesses and another 3,000 in that scaling pipeline who are really contributing employment at a local level, and they are across all sectors and all areas of the north. So how we wrap our arms around these businesses that have got that growth trajectory is really important.
Yeah, I think that is interesting. And these numbers, they're a bit dazzling because we have, I think, 1,345 scale-ups in Greater Manchester, but we also have what we're saying we've got 10,000 digital and creative businesses in Manchester alone. According to the Growth Hub, they're all brilliant, which is great.
Well, they will be, and they're adding to the economy. It's just you've got some really nuggets in that are really your growth champions, which are, and that's what we're trying to do is, say, sure at a local level you are being thoughtful about the different services a business needs at their different level, at their different stages of growth. So have your startup service, but also have a scale-up service, and don't just bundle everybody else into this amorphous view of it's a small, medium-sized enterprise. Think about the growth, make sure that's what you're delivering towards. And I know Sarah and the team are doing a good job of that. That's really important in the private and public sector.
Yeah, and the question is, how do you identify the nuggets? Tom, you have, people working in the science park. At what point actually do they qualify for working there? And what judgments do you make about judging, whether somebody is actually going to make it or not?
I guess to start with, we don't make any judgments about whether they're going to make it or not. We're an inclusive community, and it would be wrong for me to try and judge the success of their business. But we support everyone from a startup all the way through to large corporates. And as Irene's just said, it's important to have that diversity within the ecosystem, and then to try and enable that community to support each other through peer networks, through access to NEDs and the like. So for us, we focus very much on those undertaking kind of R&D and in high technology fields. So from a sector point of view, we're open and diverse. So anyone can come and base themselves there if they're working within the digital technology and life sciences or engineering arena. And in terms then of kind of trying to support those scale ups and how we identify them, well, as Irene said, we're looking at those that are growing, and it's pretty obvious to us the ones that are going through that 20% year-on-year growth, because if it's by employment, we're seeing them spatially have a lot more conversations with us about can we help that growth channel. If it's also by employment, they might be asking for connections into the universities or into other hiring partners that we work with, like North Coders or Digital Skills College. So we're constantly trying to network them into the right channels to help them with that scale. And for startups, again, we operate things like the Digital Technology Incubator, so focusing a little bit more early stage and wrapping different and more specialist support around them. I think it is about just making sure you have a differentiated offer for them all, but also that you get that whole ecosystem collaborating, and that's where you get a lot of fantastic companies shooting through. So no surprise that there's a big scaling pipeline in the Northwest as well.
Yeah, it's very good to hear that you're inclusive and not making those judgments about people, Tom, but some people do have to make those judgments, particularly the business owners themselves, in terms of deciding how they take it forward and what their potential actually is. And of course, investors having to make those kinds of judgments as to, who's actually, who are going to be the winners, who's worth actually taking these things forward. So Matt, in terms of the investment area, how do investors look at startups as to whether they can scale up and how they invest in them?
Well, I'm not sure I can speak on behalf of investors, but we have received investment, and I suppose I think with a business like ours, we have some tailwinds. So we have the next generation of investors who are set to receive the most in terms of inheritance than any other generation that's gone before them. They're socially and environmentally focused, and they're now starting to engage with the world of investing. So I suppose for the investors that have backed us, and I wouldn't like to speak for anyone else, but as, in some way they buy into those sort of long-term trends. And then, in terms of specifically on location and team, I think, we've slightly slightly strange way, probably even pre-pandemic, we started from day one. My co-founder Tom was based in London and I was based in Liverpool. So the business was 50-50 London and Liverpool from day one. We've scaled both locations now. So this time last year, we had 4 full-time employees. We now have 35 full-time employees. So I think we're just above that 20% annual growth rate on employee growth. And, our team is distributed roughly 50-50 across London and Liverpool. And I think, I don't think necessarily investors, I think investors now, the good thing is that they don't see that as an issue at all. And I think in many ways, it just opens us up to having more and more conversations with a more diverse group of investors. So we've got investors from, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds. We've also got investors from London, but we've also got investors from right across Europe and the US. So, I think, I don't think the danger with these things sometimes is if you think about the environment where you're based rather than what you're trying to become. And if you're a tech business, your ambition should be at least national, if not global. And you should be looking nationally and globally for investors, and investors should be doing the same thing.
Mm. Well, let me turn to Sarah. I mean, I think we're looking at individual businesses and whether they have potential to grow, but we're also looking at a whole sector, aren't we? We're looking at the importance of scale-ups to the economy. They are such an important part of the Greater Manchester economy and, of course, nationally as well. So how does the growth company, once companies actually do tick these boxes, more than 10 people, growing at 20% and so forth, how do you actually then help them along that journey to really achieve and be as successful as they can be?
Okay, well, great question. I'd probably just quickly jump just a little step back, just from kind of Irene's definition, because that's definitely everything she said was absolutely right as ever. But I'd probably caveat that a tiny little bit. Within this creative sector, we have to be a bit more flexible around how we define scale-ups, because this sector just works under so different rules, whether that is that a lot of project work is going on, where they just suddenly a business goes from kind of 5 core staff to suddenly 250 because they're working on a TV production, or whatever it might be that the project is at hand. So we have to be mindful of that when we talk about scale-ups within that creative sector. In terms of what we do with those that we identify as scale-ups, so I think the first and kind of most important part of all of this is the whole idea of what's the ambition like, what's the leadership team like, and then kind of what's the subsector that they're operating in. And we have, we're very lucky within the Business Growth Hub. We have a lot of very experienced growth advisors that do nothing but that, which is tapping into kind of that wider economy knowledge and kind of bringing that collective peer-to-peer knowledge that they're working in within our kind of cohort programs or their one-to-one advice. And they're working on those elements to get them maybe to kind of fill in the gaps. So whether that is around leadership or structure and processes, for example, is something that we have to really make sure is is shaped in the best possible way in order to help a business go from that, as Matt's just mentioned, five-man kind of like band to 35, because it's a really different ball game in terms of running a business that goes from under 10 to kind of like the over 30 or 50 employees. So it's that we're working on. It's around the whole proposition. How do we embed innovation, that it's not an afterthought, that the business, the bigger it gets, the stronger the pipeline of innovation and new products and services has to be in order to sustain itself. But then also this whole angle around, what marketplace do you operate in? We do, we have a lot of support around helping creative businesses go international and kind of look outwards in order to be as kind of resilient as possible. So a whole host, probably too much to mention here, but all very important components, and we assess those components individually and then help on those that need to be strengthened.
Great. Could I turn to the question of space and environment? Obviously, Tom, you referenced it in terms of what we were talking about earlier. But my question is that for a scale up, how much is it actually about the physical space that you're in being suitable? And how much is it about the soft support and the being plugged into the connections and the networks? How much is it about being in proximity to others to really be able to make a success of yourself as a scale up? And I'm asking that question in the kind of new post-coronavirus Zoom shock world that we're living in. So in other words, where is it actually going? Could virtual science parks, virtual co-working spaces and accelerators do the job just as well in future?
I guess if I start with the response and then let others come in, but it's changed and we're still living in that change. So it's hard to say where exactly we're going to land, but humans are social animals. And I think what we've heard from essentially polling our own founders and CEOs that are across the 500 companies within our portfolio, they're predominantly telling us that they want to come back for the following three reasons, which is culture, collaboration, and connection. Some of those are inward facing. Culture is, very much about the team that they're building and the culture of that company and onboarding people and, learning through kind of team environment in a physical environment as opposed to learning through a digital environment, which some companies have struggled with in terms of just the kind of tacit or general knowledge you pick up through being in an environment with colleagues. In terms of collaboration, that I think is both an internal and an external facing statement where they're saying that they want to collaborate more closely with maybe academic partners or local authority partners or other businesses. And they're, where they are located is often kind of critical to that. And I don't think, that's regionally specific. Each region in the UK has different strengths. And there'll be reasons for kind of anchoring yourself in there. And then to connection, that is that kind of social rapport that often is missing because you feel rather guilty when you join the Zoom call, to spend 15 minutes going around and actually sharing and exchanging and developing relationships. And it's also, again, connection to that ecosystem. And whilst, virtual events have been a huge help in keeping us connected, I think networks have suffered as a result. And so we see, a lot of people talking to us about a hybrid form of working, sort of 3 days where most people are, spending time physically together, but the entrepreneurs and leaders of these businesses are talking about much more empowerment and autonomy on the team to decide how and when they arrive at their place of work, and to make those choices. So perhaps it's about putting the corners on the box and letting people decide within some sort of guidelines how they're going to work within that company. So I think it's a rich future for employees in terms of their kind of options of work, but also that we will see a huge volume of companies come back. And I mentioned to you before the panel, we're already at 50% footfall in our locations back on pre-pandemic, and we're seeing that rise every week. So it'll be a different world, but again, that connection, collaboration will be critical for the future, and that will help companies scale as well, especially in the creative industries where networks are so important.
Matt, what kind of ecology do you work in? What's the environment?
So I'm actually in our office now. I've been in for a long time, probably before I was supposed to be. But look, it's really, really difficult. So we were a company that was using Zoom daily, if not weekly, before the pandemic. We're a tech company. Everyone can work remotely. The day that we were forced to work remotely was very, very easy for us. Everybody just didn't come in, kept their laptops at home. As I say, from day one, we've been dual located anyway, so we've been used to that sort of remote working arrangement, but it's still really tough. So, in terms of space, for example, we've grown our team rapidly over the last 12 months. You're then trying to forecast out whether, are we going to do something like Tom's just said there, where we do sort of, flexible? We've always been relatively flexible, but are we going to sort of formalize that flexibility? And then if so, well, how much square foot do we need? How many desks do we need? What facilities do we need in the office? Are we better off in a shared working space? Are we better off in our own footprint? Can we commit to a 3-year lease? Can we commit to a 6-year lease? It's really, really challenging. I mean, one thing's for sure though, is I'm definitely in the camp that, as someone who's recruited probably 30 people during the pandemic and not even met some of them face to face, is that, you can't beat in-person collaboration for certain things. I think what you get, Zoom as someone who used to go to London 3-4 times a week, I'm very, very happy that Zoom has caught on, and I don't have to do that. But I think what you miss is that spontaneous sort of ideas, that spontaneous collaboration. Oh, can I just run something by you? What do you think about this? To book a Zoom call with someone seems like an incredibly formal event for something that is just a quick chat that would happen, round the coffee machine or, just by someone's desk. So I do think you're missing a bit of that. I do think you miss a bit of being able to create the culture. I think you miss the ability to just check in on people and make sure people are okay as easily as you would in the office. So, I'm a fan of the office, but I'm also a fan of flexibility. And I think for scale-ups, I think, we've recruited people now. We've started recruiting remotely. We used to have a thing where, you had to be able to commute into either our London office or our Liverpool office. We've just hired our first person in York. We're looking at hiring people internationally to us. And it's a challenge because we say, well, are these people sort of connected to our culture as a business? Are they in touch with us? Are they part of the team? Those questions arise. And I can't say that I've got any answers. I don't think we've figured it out yet. And I think we just have to carry on, play it by ear and do what we think is best.
Is it not the case? I wonder, Irene, the future of work is such an important thing for the economy as a whole, with social and economic implications, how we are all going to work. And it's not just startups, scale-ups or big industry. But the thing about scale-ups is that maybe we all have to guess what the future is going to be like. And maybe the choices that scale-ups make, they're more the picture of the future than anybody else, perhaps, than any other sector of the economy. So do you detect changes of attitude within the scale-up sector as to how people are going to work in the future?
Well, let me pick up a couple of points before I come on Caspar. I just want to build on what Tom and Matt have said. We've looked very intensely at what drives local scale-up growth. What are the ingredients to that? And we've looked at the number of startups, the density of startups, is it transport, is it bank debt? What actually drives it? And on actually very detailed quantitative regression analysis, there are 3 key drivers. And Tom and Matt have touched on them all today, and Sarah. Firstly, it's access to skilled talent. And what's great about now is that skilled talent can be local, but as Matt has just said, he can connect people now more remotely into his business than ever before. And that's a trend that I think will continue. But access to skilled talent, really important, and building that at the local level through apprenticeships, internships, all of those good things that were touched on earlier. Second thing is access to clusters and hubs. This is what is so fantastic with the life science sector and what's there in Manchester Science Park and in Alderley, what that has developed and a hub, as Tom said, from startup through to scale up to large, through the peer network and investors. You've got a creative economy and cluster there as well. And that, in the way it's being done now, is really, really important because that will enable that to grow. And the third element of that is actually access to growth capital, locally connected. Now, one of the things that is changing is the ability to connect that capital even, again, more remotely than physically. But there's still a lot about building angels and at that local level. And then there's 3 other ingredients that come into that in terms of the way the ecosystem behaves. And that is about knowledge sharing, and active university engagement. Again, all of those ingredients happening up there in the north and absolutely in the northwest. So when I then flip that into us, what do they want and what are their characteristics? They are very international and they are very innovative. Tom touched on that. That's a fundamental aspect to our scale-up economy. They want to see better ability to connect with the universities, to connect with R&D, to connect with the talent that's coming through in the schools. And that needs to very much a very proactive engagement from that ecosystem with those businesses. And certainly, what are they expecting to see in the future? They're using more AI. They're using more big data to have, people coming into their business that have got really good from schools, critical thinking, social and tech skills. One of the highest things they want out of someone joining their business is critical thinking coming into the business and embedding that. And then they also just want to be able to access the right mentor peer groups. And everything that you've got in Tom, in what Sarah's doing, and Matt, those ingredients are there. So scaling that up is going to deliver to your scale up going forward.
I'd probably just add to that, because Matt couldn't have been a greater case study for what it is exactly what we talk to businesses about on a daily basis. You know, this is exactly the kind of the components. Currently, obviously, the whole idea of how do we, I guess, put the borders on how much flexibility we want in the business. How does it aid the culture that we want to nourish or, you know, create? And so I think, I guess my message, you know, to add on to everything that everyone said is businesses don't have to kind of like figure all of this out themselves. There is so much support, because I think, again, this makes the creative sector so different. Everyone's incredibly generous to kind of share their experiences, share their learnings, share their mistakes, so that others don't have to do it. Because I think we recognize that the stronger the individual players, the stronger we are as a community. And with that, I think we'll go further faster. So, you know, for me as representing the Growth Hub, there's so much support. I know Tom, you know, is doing everything they can from their side to kind of like help. But then also the other business owners, they're always open to kind of discuss opportunities.
You came onto a great point there, Sarah, when you said this is what's different about the creative sector, because in some ways, all the things we've been talking about apply to startups, to scale-ups. They apply to scale-ups. This is the process of scaling up. And, you know, of the 7,500 scale-ups across the whole of the North, you know, how many of them, our session today is about, you know, scaling creative businesses. I mean, is there an essential difference in scaling a creative business or scaling another business?
Do you want me to answer?
I think anybody who thinks that, but yes, go
Well,
for
I'll
it.
start off and then let Sarah. I mean, Sarah, the things we do see is the creative sector do feel that access to capital is more difficult for them to investment and getting that connectivity. In terms of their top priorities and challenges, access to markets is number one, talent and finance coming very strongly behind, but they do have a harder time, and they perceive there is less finance available to them as a creative business. Sarah, over to you. Some of the focus you're putting on the creative sector.
Again, couldn't agree more with you, Irene. I think it's twofold. So no, the general housekeeping of business applies to every business, whatever sector it is in. So you know, from your kind of like finances, as I said, kind of like looking at how you segment the market, to how you sell, how you price, everything kind of adheres to the general physics of business. Saying all of this though, once you have figured that out, it needs to be stress tested through the lens of the creative sector. So and again, this is where those experts come in, and the growth advisor that can kind of help with that. I think buying behavior is different. You know, that is something that definitely needs to be taken into account. Some of the services, you know, and we talk a lot about this around when creative businesses take their products or services international. Some of it has to be kind of, I call it transcreated. So not just translated, but it has to be molded into the new market. And I think, you know, that is, again, that's something that needs to be slightly more fine-tuned within the creative sector than within other sectors. So I think kind of like looking at different personas and then all of that is important to kind of be looked at through the lens of that creative sector. But the business housekeeping needs to be there, and that needs to be sound, and that needs to be sound for every scale about that, no matter what they do.
There are certain things apply to all businesses, specific characteristics. Well, it's very interesting because, of course, when we talk about sci-tech businesses, well, you know, they're about all the rest of it. They're very creative businesses in many ways. Well, Matt, you're a financial services sector business, which some people might not think immediately means creative, but you come across as pretty creative business. I think this question of investment, barriers to investment, the fact that people are hesitant to invest in creative businesses, this is really a key issue, isn't it? Because do we have information, Irene, I wonder, you know, about the return on investment of creative businesses as a whole, about the success rate of creative businesses, which seem to be such an important catalyst for growth in ideas and innovation. Do we have information about that we can use to leverage better investment?
Yeah, I mean, Casper, we've been doing work on a creative investor toolkit, which gives you exactly that information. It doesn't just give you the information sector as a whole, but right into the actual subsectors. So whether it's be gaming, whether it be media, whether it be fashion, and there are just basically huge opportunities, hugely global businesses. So that's something that will be. You can have a look at a trial of that in the coming days, and up to speed on it, and we can certainly share information. You have got some great scale up creatives in the north. There's 220 of them, and they're employing, generating 14 billion. Some of those are Sumo Digital, Team 17, Timeline TV. There's really great hub of activity there. And what Sarah speaks to is, those are great businesses, how do we bring more through that pipeline, and how do we get them connected to each other? And importantly for all this community is, to individuals, you can become an angel investor in this, to the VCs, what's your specialist creative sector specialization, and how do we connect creative into some of the investors who can then access the business opportunities that exist. So very importantly, that's what we've been working on, a creative investor toolkit that really does showcase what the return of investment is. And
if I was to jump in, I think, one of the challenges, the creative industries is a really diverse, grouping, as it were, and maturity of the investor base depends on the subsector, as Irene said. So something like gaming, which now from a global turnover perspective is bigger than music and film combined, the investor base is a lot more mature, and someone like, or formerly Cubic Motion, now part of the Epic Games Group, who everyone knows runs Fortnite. They were a University of Manchester spin-off. They've scaled, in Manchester very successfully. They've got a team of close to 100 people, so they can access the talent. And they had 20 million of investment from North Edge that gave them the growth capital they needed to, get where they wanted to go and be acquired by, one of the industry leaders. So there is maturity in some of those subsectors, but I think other parts of the creative industry suffer, disproportionately in terms of that maturity and the growth capital, because equally some of these businesses are able to access capital, but is it sufficient to stop them having to go back and raise again 6, 12, 18 months later? And unleashing the potential of the creative sector is often giving them sufficient capital for growth, as opposed to capital for the next milestone, which is a big challenge in the UK compared to the US.
And just picking up on that, Tom, I mean, we've just had today Innovate UK, our innovation agency, launch a creative sector program. So, businesses out there can look to apply to that. But also we know if a business gets through and gets funding from Innovate UK, that will crowd in then private sector investment from angels, from VCs. So what we need to see is that, as Tom says, that joining up of that finance ecosystem. And there are, a real recognition of the importance of the creative sector from the government. You heard it from the minister at the beginning. This new investment from Innovate UK is going to be important to some of those businesses who then will get the angel investment coming in on the back of that.
Mm-hmm. I'd probably just quickly add to that. I think, kind of like going back to what Tom said, I think the right environment kind of like nurtures, so we seem to be talking a lot about kind of creative tech businesses. So things like, connectivity. I know, Tom, your sides are really, really championing that. But I think on the other side, the flip side, where maybe let's talk, where we're talking more about the cultural businesses, the creative businesses, and the investment into them. I think, along with obviously looking for a good return on investment, and then in the financial side of it, I think there's also a question around what kind of society do we want to be in. Those businesses are, and I think we've experienced this so painfully and deeply with a lot of those businesses having to stop throughout the pandemic. It is a vital part of our culture, and we do we want to nurture it? How do we nurture it best? And how do we give it the opportunity to grow? Kind of like on that other side, I'm kind of preempting. We have a couple more specific subsector roundtables that will dive into more of that. But I think it's important to mention, yes, there's the tech side, but there's also the more kind of traditional creative businesses.
Well, that's really wonderful, and the lights are flashing at us. I think we've actually run out of time, but it's been a really exciting, very, very interesting conversation, and I hope it feeds into many of the other things that are happening today and tomorrow. So thank you all very, very much indeed.